It's fantastic to see so many of you here today. I have to say I've discovered I really like Oakland. I think it gets a bit of a bad rep. Anybody here from Oakland? I know this. I like this city, sir. Okay, so I got approached by Rick a few weeks ago, and he said we should talk at UDS a little bit more about what we do with OEMs. It's actually fundamentally interesting to developers. And I was like, come on, Rick, this is not a sales and marketing conference. Do we really want to cover this? And he said, we really have to cover it. We need to explain why the relationship between Ubuntu and OEMs fundamentally makes Ubuntu a better product, that it takes it takes free open source software to places that it's never been before. And fundamentally, it's our work with these partners and with other OEMs that is increasingly becoming an equal, if not dominant, conduit for innovation into the platform. So I'm going to run through, in 15 minutes, the work of what almost 200 people at Canonical do in terms of working with OEMs and commercial partners, and try and put it into this setting of how does it improve quality in Ubuntu, how does it improve quality in Ubuntu, how does it drive innovation into the platform, and how does it take Ubuntu to places it has not been. So let's start with some sort of basic goals. What do we want? Fundamentally, Ubuntu enabled and certified on all desktops. And I say desktops there, I mean laptops and servers. But I'm going to focus on desktops to begin with. We want it pre-installed globally, not just in certain markets. And we want it promoted at retail. This dream of having an open source desktop everywhere. So how does that actually come about? I'm going to cover enablement to begin with. So I don't know if you all know this, but that little picture up top right, left is a little pizza box, and it has components taped inside it. And that's how most laptops begin at the start of an enablement cycle if they're being built at HP and Dell. And typically it's about a 4-month cycle to take something from that rudimentary box and turn it into a product that ships from factory. At Canonical, we have a team called the Professional Engineering and Services team, who are very involved in working with our OEM and our ODM partners in taking it from that pizza box to a final product. Just on our side alone, OEM testing is like a 1,200 test matrix that we're running on these devices. We're running anything between 300 and 500 resume and suspend cycles. Does Wi-Fi get knocked out every time I close the lid, or does it come back instantly? It typically takes 3 hours to set up a factory line to make laptops. And yet once that laptop line is set up at a factory, they are literally pushing out a new laptop every 28 seconds. This is done on an industrial scale process. Some of the things that we worry about at Canonical when working with ODMs and OEMs, we have something called a stop ship. Is there anything wrong with the software that would actually stop it from shipping? Because once you stop that factory line, you can imagine that you're stopping the work of literally hundreds, if not thousands of people. So we have a very, very strong culture about avoiding stop ships with our critical partners. But it's a huge amount of work. And typically, I think we think of desktops as being easier than servers, but in fact, in many ways, desktops are harder than servers, and I'll talk about that in a second. But here are the 4 stages it goes through: engineering validation, design validation, production validation, and then finally getting it out to market. And an idea of a few of the things that the team do to make sure that this laptop exits working perfectly with Ubuntu. If you compare it to other types of device, this is really interesting. I would strongly argue that getting laptops and desktops well enabled with Ubuntu is a tougher job than doing it with servers or phones. If you actually look at what goes on in the industry, device complexity is probably lowest in a server and highest in a mobile in terms of components. Enablement cycle, though, is very, very fast in desktops. And production control, and what I mean by that is the nature of the way that the outsourcing of laptop and desktops has evolved over the last few years. It's been devolved to ODMs in Taipei, then devolved to ODMs outsourcing to coastal China, and now it's going to internal cities in China. That production control is lowest in the desktop area. And then component support for Linux is probably highest in servers, and lowest in the desktop. And so one of the other things that we're working on with Dell and Lenovo, Acer and Asus at the moment, is making sure that Linux enablement is a prerequisite of purchasing components to go into these devices. We actually need to make it so that before a component manufacturer or an ODM ever shows a device to Dell or to anybody else, that those components have already been pre-certified, pre-checked that they work with Ubuntu. You simply cannot fix driver issues from ground zero in a 4-month cycle. You need to make sure that that component, before it even gets sold to an ODM or listed for an OEM, is already pre-tested and certified. And so, so a lot of work working with the OEMs, and there are other OEMs who, like HP, who've always had this as a policy. So I looked at Bdale, who's going to get up next and talk about it. But this is always a surprise, I think, for most people. So Ubuntu at launch. I talk about Ubuntu at launch as being different from just the distro working well on your desktop. Okay. In reality, Ubuntu works well on many, many laptops and desktops. It's a miracle that we constantly celebrate every cycle. But working well across hundreds of laptops and desktops is a fundamentally different challenge from working perfectly on a single device. It's a different challenge. The second challenge is doing it on the day of launch. It's always been easy if we had 6-9 months after a device came out to get the drivers working. It's a completely different ball game to do Ubuntu at launch. And that's something that, working with Dell and Lenovo, we have got better and better at. Some of the challenges of doing that. Well, firstly, higher expectations. We learned 4 years ago, working with Dell, Compal, Quanta, and Vistron, and other ODMs in the industry, that actually consumer-grade expectations are often higher than enterprise-grade expectations when it comes to desktops and laptops. If you've got an engineering workstation, you probably don't care if when Skype initiates a call, it doesn't correctly deal with sound dimming on Rhythmbox. But as a consumer, that's actually, on a consumer desktop or a laptop, that's actually a much more real problem. It turns out that consumer-grade support for laptops and desktops is tougher. We do huge amounts of work with drivers and working with the component industry. Colin King, I don't know if he's in the room. Colin, where are you? No, he's somewhere else. Huge amounts of work on improving firmware and BIOS support. We've had to map out the way that different factories ghost Ubuntu onto devices. I mean, literally factory by factory, ODM by ODM. And that's something that, again, the professional engineering services does huge amounts of work with Dell and Lenovo on. And then finally, ODM training. It turned out that when we started this journey 4 years ago, this is an industry used to working with Windows. Working with Ubuntu was like throwing a handful of sand into a well-oiled machine. It turned out that the QA testing at the end of the manufacturing line was not designed to check that Ubuntu was working or that Linux was working. It turns out that the QA lead at the end of a factory line never even heard of Linux. And so over the last 4 years, we've done a huge amount of work in Taipei to train ODM technicians who are designing, developing, and then running manufacturing lines with Ubuntu. To give you an idea of that scale, we have done training for over 2,000 ODMs in the last 3 years in Taipei. Sorry, 2,000 ODM engineers. Excuse me, 2,000 ODM engineers in the last 3.5 years in Taipei. Anybody here in the Taipei team, can you sort of stand up or hear from Ubuntu in Taipei or China? Canonical team, Taipei. Huge round of applause for these guys. So offices in Taipei, Shanghai, and we're literally opening our Beijing office this year. This last year, we shipped between 8 and 10 million units. So the accounting is just coming in. Sometimes it takes a while to get the final accounting in. put that in perspective, over the last 2 years, we have pre-installed Ubuntu on over $7.5 billion worth of client hardware. Okay, that is a lot of free software out there on a lot of great hardware from partners. Next year, we believe we will more than double this, looking at the contracts we have in place and the volume that they're growing to. And I'm confident, if you work out 18 million units, that's 5% of shipping PCs worldwide will ship with Ubuntu. And I think that deserves a huge round of applause to the team. Some tools that I should call out, the certification tools for Ubuntu, ubuntu.com/certification lists out all of the units that have been certified. There are things like the hardware enablement cross-referencer, which allows ODMs to go in and actually check which components have been pre-certified with Ubuntu. And we now have odm.ubuntu.com, which is sets of tools for ODM engineers to take Ubuntu and get it onto devices. Of course, enablement is not enough, and one of the other focuses is making sure that when people see Ubuntu for the first time in a market, that it appeals to them. How do we make sure that Ubuntu is not simply a proxy for someone putting another OS on it 24 hours later? And we have projects in China, for example, to take lots of local content, local software, and put it straight, wow, in your face as soon as you boot up. This is more than just localization. This is making Ubuntu deeply relevant to people in market. And at retail, if a couple of years ago you'd have seen Ubuntu at retail, for example, in China or India, and you start to see stickers on devices. We have taken this to a whole new level this year. This is Vodafone in South Africa, where you're seeing Ubuntu-branded laptops being marketed in shops, and it's very much Ubuntu and a full retail experience. This is not Windows on the top of the shelf and then the slightly cheaper Linux boxes beneath. This is our partner brands taking Ubuntu and putting it front and center. This is Dell's stores in China. And look at this. Absolutely amazing. Over 200 stores with Ubuntu branding throughout the stores, Ubuntu branded salespeople in the stores trained on Ubuntu and promoting it. And this is fundamentally a huge change in how free software is actually marketed. I know your question is, when is it going to happen at Best Buy down the road? And the answer to that is we're working on it. But the fact that all of these models are now enabled with Ubuntu, the fact that we're learning these lessons in retail, means that I'm confident we are going to get there. A couple of minutes on server. The good news, Bdale, is I'm going to include a little bit of HP stuff here. So, I was watching Tintin the other day, rendered on a 36,000 core farm of HP servers down in New Zealand by Weta. This is the company that rendered Avatar, and this is their latest film that's out. And that 36,000 core render farm is all running on Ubuntu. Of course, it's not just movies. If you go to the Sanger Institute in the UK, it's DNA that's being decoded using Ubuntu. If you go to many of the top websites in the world, I was looking, Merriam-Webster is now hosted on Ubuntu. We know that Wikimedia is hosted on Ubuntu. Salon.com, I discovered this weekend, is hosted on Ubuntu. Sadly, TMZ is also hosted on Ubuntu. But we also have billion-dollar companies like Instagram, who've built their complete infrastructure on Ubuntu. And this Ubuntu server really is an extremely fast-growing story. So what are we doing with OEMs? I cannot say how excited I am that 2 weeks ago, HP's industrial standard server unit, ISS, announced that they will be taking all of the most popular ProLiants, this is the x86 part of HP's portfolio, and that we've entered into a long-term agreement with them for them to certify that with Ubuntu. It's a huge testament to the progress we've made on Ubuntu server, and I think it deserves a huge round of applause for everybody involved. We talk a lot about Ubuntu as being the #1 cloud OS, and just to put some reality to that, these are just some of the large public clouds now running on Ubuntu. HP's public cloud, one of the world's largest service providers, Rackspace, largest telephone company here in the US, AT&T, Ericsson, the world's largest provider of mobile network infrastructure running public clouds on Ubuntu, Deutsche Telekom, largest European telco. This is just, this is extraordinary stuff that's going on. And in addition to our work with HP on the ProLiant, we were delighted to announce last month that with Dell, we are partnering with them globally to offer OpenStack design, deployment, and management support for anyone taking OpenStack and putting it out there in the wild. Critically, and I don't know if this is always noted, Ubuntu Advantage now includes full support for OpenStack components such as Swift, Nova, Keystone, Glance, Quantum, and obviously Crowbar, and that is just a huge win. So 2 final thoughts on servers. Every day, 7,000 new servers are deployed in the world. And by 2015, we will live in a world with over 10 million servers. That's 33 billion kilowatt hours per year of energy that's being consumed. We think that driving down power consumption and the footprint of those servers in data centers is one of the defining challenges of compute in our time. And we are delighted to announce, or to have announced late last year, our work with HP on Project Moonshot, which I hope we're going to hear a little bit more about from Bdale. Canonical is a core partner, and Ubuntu is a core partner with Moonshot. We're working on the Redstone platform, and we'll also be Discovery Lab partners with HP around this. And you saw this morning the announcement of the first Energy Core device. There is much more of that coming. So if I'm going to summarize, and I know I've rushed through a lot very briefly, in terms of our work with OEM, I feel very confident that Ubuntu is a far higher quality product than it could ever be without our work with our OEM and ODM partners. Huge amounts of the innovation that now flow into this great platform now come from those partnerships. And it's already very clear Ubuntu is getting into a whole ton of places that it would never otherwise get into without these partnerships. And I hope that that's clear for everyone to see. Thank you very much for your time. Hello.
Hey, so I'm glad to finally introduce someone at UDS that's so well known in the Debian ecosystem. So we're very proud to have the open source and Linux chief technologist from HP, Bdale Garbee, who, as a hobby, fires rockets into space. So,
among other things. So, can you hear me? And you got me switched over, cool. Yeah, amazing pile of technology I'm using to pull together a bunch of slides from a bunch of places. Also, I hope things are getting started well for you. You all having a good day so far? I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. And I'm excited for a couple of reasons. The first is that I'm going to do something a little bit unusual today. For me, at least, over the last couple of years. I'm going to give a talk that's almost entirely HP content. I apologize to all the Rocket fans in the crowd. I don't have Rocket pictures in this presentation, but that's life. Out of curiosity, how many of you have never heard me speak somewhere before? Oh, wow, that's sort of amazing. So let me spend just a second telling you who I am, because I don't want to presume that all of you know. I tell people that I made my first personal contribution of source code to this thing we now call free software in about 1979. And I've been sort of a continuous participant ever since. I've had the honor since about May of 2001 of serving as HP's chief technologist for open source and Linux. And in this role, I have the opportunity to help guide the strategic thinking and some of the business decision making at HP around Linux and related open source technologies. Perhaps more relevant to lots of you, I've also been involved with the Debian project almost since the beginning. I joined Debian in the fall of 1994, and over the years I've done a lot of different things in Debian. I was the instigator or one of the key early contributors to 5 different ports of Debian to non-x86 architectures. Today, the one that I'm probably the most pleased to see still doing really well is the ARM port, though along the way lots of other things have come and gone. I served as a Debian project leader back in 2002, and I still today serve as chairman of Debian's technical committee. As a consequence, even though the only time I've ever been to a UDS before was the other time it was in California over at the Googleplex in Mountain View, I don't remember when that was, 2006 or something? I think Edgy had just released. In any case, it seems like it's been a really long time. Despite that, every time I see an announcement of another Ubuntu release, I have a wonderful feeling about it, because as somebody who's been involved in free software for a very long time and in Debian for a very long time in a very significant way, every time I see the things that we have worked on over the years being used and taken to a broader and more significant audience, I feel really good about that. So thank you very much for all the things that all of you have done to help take everything that matters to me and carry it forward in the world, and congratulations very much on the successful launch of the 1204 bits here very recently. I also have the pleasure these days of doing what I like to think of as providing a little bit of adult supervision in various places with roles ranging from sitting on the board at the Linux Foundation and places like that to all sorts of other activities that are sort of beyond just developing code. And as has already been mentioned, I'm sort of well known for taking all of my other hobbies and somehow turning them into open source or open hardware projects. If you're curious about all of that, feel free to Google me and take a look at some of the other things I've worked on, some of the talks I've given at places like Linux Conference Australia and elsewhere. And certainly with respect to the rocketry stuff, if you happen to find yourself in the Front Range of Colorado when the weather's good, feel free to let me know and maybe we can end up taking you to a rocket launch. And for those of you who've known me for a long time, I'm pleased to report that for the first time in years I'm actually working on actively on an amateur satellite project again. Unfortunately, unless you're a US citizen or permanent resident, I can't talk to you about that. But eventually, we will publish in Dead Tree form the complete design of that satellite, so it too will in the end be an open source or open hardware project. Okay, so why are we here? Why is all of a sudden HP's logo on those cool lanyards you're all wearing? Well, in a word, it's about the cloud. HP's about to transition our public cloud offering from a private beta to a public beta status later this week. And Ubuntu is one of the technology elements that's very core to that cloud offering. But as you can tell from the last talk, it's also about servers, and it's about a lot of other things. But what I'm really going to talk to you about today is the things that are happening in HP that cause this to be such an interesting time for us to be deeply involved with the Ubuntu community. So why is it that you should care about HP in this context? I mean, aren't we just another hardware company? Well, yeah, but we're the world's largest IT company. There's some stats up there. The kind of things that freak me out on a daily basis are the fact that the company is now well north of 1/3 employees. I mean, just think about that for a second. That's a really big place. One of the consequences of being this big is that almost anything you can think of to do with a computer, HP's probably involved in it somehow. Virtually every part of the IT industry, almost all device classes, almost all service classes, HP has some kind of a market position in. And in almost everything that we do, we're either the first or the second largest player in that particular market. So the consequence of this is that we interact with a lot of customers, we sell a lot of products and services to them, and as a consequence, we get to learn a lot, and the things that we learn help guide us in thinking about how we would like to see the whole IT industry evolve and transform for the future, and where the opportunities are to do really cool stuff. To put this in a little more perspective by the numbers, Chris talked about sort of the production rate of individual notebooks or desktops being something like 1 every 28 seconds. Well, in case you hadn't noticed, we make more than one model. We actually sell something like 2 PCs per second. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Similarly with printers, the number's not quite as big, but it's darn close. And for me, hosted within HP server organization, the fact that we ship a server roughly every 15 seconds is just kind of mind-boggling. And the fact that the definition of a server keeps changing, and what we ship as a server today, even a modest server has a core count and a set of capabilities that would have been a cluster just a few years ago, means that the amount of capability that's being delivered into the world with an HP logo on it is just sort of astounding. And as a consequence, almost everything that you do in your life today in the modern world is somehow impacted by technology that's produced and delivered by HP. There's a few little stats up there, I won't belabor them, but it's very, very hard to exist in the world today without having almost everything that you do that touches technology during the day somehow ending up touching something from HP. And so, I don't know, 18 months ago or so, we made some sort of fundamental decisions. And some of those decisions had to do with the recognition that we're sort of the only company in the IT industry that actually plays in all of these different spaces where we've got everything from consumer devices to enterprise infrastructure at all different kinds of scalings, all different operating systems and related environments and so forth. And we started driving on this notion of converged infrastructure. And what this is really all about is this notion that we ought to be able to transform the industry, that as we go towards the future, we don't want to be constrained by the way things have always worked. We want instead to look at where our customers see opportunities, what are the problems that cause them the most headache and grief right now, and what is it that we can do to try and help them by providing technology that's a better fit for solving their technology issues, concerns, and needs, which in the end is all about trying to help make their business or their personal life situations better. And so in the server side of the company, where I'm personally hosted, we did something that sort of historically is a little unusual, and that is that we publicly disclosed a set of initiatives or big deal, high-level projects, which are each transformative in their respective parts of the server industry. You've already heard something about Project Moonshot, and I'll talk just a little bit more about that. This is the project that HP's announced that is at the hyperscale to exascale end of the server scaling continuum. It's all about dramatically re-architecting the way we think about and construct data centers to get to a radically better power per MIPS kind of situation, so that as we go forward and deploy the number of servers that Chris and others think are going to happen by 2015, that we don't consume as many billions of kilowatt hours or whatever that number was as he stated. At the same time, at the very opposite end of the scaling continuum, HP also publicly disclosed in November or so a project called Odyssey, which is all about extending the capabilities at the scale-up end of the server continuum, the big iron part of our business, in a way that's also got substantial relevance for Linux. And then there's another thing that we disclosed called Project Voyager, which is all about recognizing that customers have these problems that are coming as a consequence of the scale of the things that they're trying to manage, and that lots of things that in the past you could do manually or semi-manually just aren't going to be able to work that way in the future. So transforming the server industry, sounds like a big goal, a big objective. But when you're the world's largest IT company, would anything less seem appropriate? So let me talk just a little bit about Moonshot. You've already heard a little bit about what it's about. Calxeda is indeed one of the partners that we're working with in the Moonshot program. There are others. I won't try and read the slide to you. There are stats there about what we hope to achieve. What I want to make really clear, and this should, I hope, not be hard to understand, but with all three of those programs that I articulated having names that are somehow associated with, space and space exploration and so forth, we're trying to sort of convey this sense that these are all really big things. They're going to take time. They're going to take multiple iterations to get from where we are now to what we'd like to have in the future. Moonshot starts with a platform called Redstone. And for those of you who know your American space history, think about where Redstone fit in the history of the space program. It was pretty exciting stuff at the time. It was transformative. It changed the way we think about the world, but it certainly wasn't the ultimate in space vehicles. Lots and lots of iterations had to come after that, and the same thing will be true in the Moonshot program. That's what the first step along a path. As I mentioned, at the other end of the scaling continuum, going all the way from hyperscale, exascale down to the big iron end, HP announced Project Odyssey. You know, in simple terms, Odyssey is all about bringing x86 processor technology into our biggest iron systems alongside the existing Itanium and HPUX infrastructure. And as a consequence, making a substantial investment and commitment to bringing capabilities that are necessary to our mission-critical customers, who are the folks who care the most about those big iron systems and solving the kinds of problems that necessitate the acquisition of that kind of infrastructure, and ensuring that those same capabilities are available when you choose to run Linux or Windows on those sorts of x86 systems. I think it's probably obvious to most of you here that this is perhaps a less immediately obvious fit for Ubuntu as a distribution than is the case with Odyssey. But as is the case for Moonshot. But for me personally, it's exciting that at both extremes of the server scaling continuum, HP is investing heavily in development programs that cause Linux to be a key element of how we're going to drive new capabilities and expand the overall server market. And then Voyager, as I mentioned, is really all about taking our customers' biggest issues as we move forward, which have to do with how they manage all of the complexity that's part of this infrastructure, and give them more intelligent ways of doing that. Okay, so as Chris mentioned, we recently made this announcement about starting to certify and support Ubuntu on our ProLiant servers. I thought it would be interesting to talk just briefly about how we got there. If you look back to August 2006, HP did something that nobody else in the industry had done. We announced support as a first-tier hardware vendor for Debian on our ProLiant systems. And that was pretty significant. It was pretty exciting, and it led to a lot of interesting business opportunities. In fact, it was sufficiently successful that in May of 2009, we broadened that support and introduced a new website called communitylinux.org to capture information about how to run community or non-commercial distributions on our systems, even when those systems were not part of our fully certified and supported software matrix. And at that time, Ubuntu was part of that expansion. And so we went from having Debian as a supported distribution to also enabling a number of other similar sorts of distributions, including at that time Ubuntu. And then, of course, last month, we made this announcement of 1204 LTS to be certified and supported with a long-term commitment from HP. So in effect, we've sort of gone through this progression from supporting Debian, which is the sort of principal upstream distribution feeding technology into Ubuntu, caused a lot of the work to be done, which in the end made supporting Ubuntu on these servers possible, and then through the community Linux to today's Ubuntu support. And I'm pleased that all three of those URLs are still active and still work just fine. And so if you're interested, feel free to hit the last one and go see what sort of the details are about that support. It's not 100% of all ProLiant models because not all of them are terribly interesting or relevant to people who want to run Ubuntu. But this is not a little tiny thing either. It's a very significant support decision, and we hope that in the end it leads to lots of interesting future possibilities together. Okay, so that's all about the server stuff. But I mentioned that the reason I'm here is really largely about cloud. Well, the interesting thing is that in some sense, they're really not distinct topics to someone like me. Because in fact, even before we began to build the new cloud infrastructure that Ubuntu is so significantly a part of, HP, because of the stuff that we make and the fact that we sell so much of it to people running Linux. In fact, according to the IDC folks, I think we're now in our 14th year as the clear leader in the sales of server and storage to people who end up running Linux on those systems. Not surprisingly, we've ended up being the technology provider of choice for most of the world's existing large cloud infrastructures. The difference is those are things that other people were building using our technology elements. So at some point, it became clear that the right answer as we move forward into a world that's more about mobile devices and their connection to infrastructure being provided elsewhere, to build something more along the lines of a public cloud offering from HP. I'm not going to try and talk a whole lot about the details of that cloud offering. Richard Kaufman, who's the chief technologist for our cloud services unit, is here, and I guess will be speaking tomorrow morning. So I encourage all of you who are interested in knowing more details of what we're doing and which elements of technology are part of that to show up for Richard's talk tomorrow in the Cloud Summit. But when you bring all of these things together, when you talk about the work that we're doing in cloud space and combining that with all of this transformative energy that we're putting into servers and related elements of technology infrastructure, it really is all about driving a real transformation in the IT industry, about making it possible for people to do things much differently and better than they've been able to do in the past, and to deliver substantially more infrastructure that does more useful things for more people without necessarily having to tie up the kinds of gazillions of kilowatt hours that otherwise might be necessary. So when we talk about our involvement in cloud, and in particular HP's public cloud offering, there are two key technology underpinnings that I do want to highlight, both of which you've heard about and will continue to hear about a lot here at UDS. The first is OpenStack. HP's made a really significant commitment of HP resources to OpenStack. We've managed in a fairly short period of time to put together a really outstanding team of people working in this particular part of HP's business through a combination of assignment of folks that were already part of HP to go work on this and hiring some of the best and brightest folks from this community. As a consequence, not surprisingly, we very quickly become one of the largest contributors of technical content. And I think Richard will talk a little bit more tomorrow about some of the details of which parts we're working the most on and making the biggest contributions to. We also do some other things, though, in the same way that's been true over many years as we've gotten involved with lots of different open source projects over time. We try to do more than just participate in the code development part of the project because it seems like the right thing to do. One of them is that we're hosting the build farm for the OpenStack community, which helps them to do their continuous integration testing and so forth. And we're also, as early members of the process that will lead towards an OpenStack Foundation, trying to help guide the transition of the OpenStack work to that sort of a foundation model. We'll see how all of that works out over time, but this is part of what it means to HP to make a really substantial investment. It's a combination of putting the right people to work to do the technical things that are required, and trying to help make sure that the project has the infrastructure that's necessary to be successful and has the organizational mechanisms and financial support that's required to be able to drive things forward. And of course, Ubuntu LTS is the other substantial technical underpinning that I hope all of you are incredibly proud of. And frankly, it's the combination of the sort of continuous integration philosophy, the willingness to track OpenStack releases as they make progress going forward at this very sort of fast-paced, formative moment in the history of OpenStack's development, combined with the stability and capability of running on top of an LTS that makes this combination so interesting, so exciting, and so potentially powerful to HP that causes us to want to be as supportive as we are of both OpenStack and of Ubuntu. So as I mentioned earlier, we're on the cusp of beginning the public beta process for our public cloud offering. This has been up and running for a while in a private beta kind of mode, and I guess it's Thursday this week that we transition from the private beta to the public beta. As Richard said earlier, this is the point at which we go from lots of freeloaders messing around with our systems to lots of paying customers messing around with our systems. And we certainly invite all of you to pay attention and participate. As was mentioned this morning by Mark, if you speak to the folks around at the HP table, they'll be happy to help you understand what you need to do to get plugged in and to participate in that process. So with that, I'll thank you very much for your time and your attention today. Please go take a look at hpcloud.com to learn more about what's happening with the HP Public Cloud offering. Since Twitter hashtags were mentioned, there's one for our stuff that you can follow to see what's going on. As I mentioned, Richard will be speaking tomorrow morning at 10:45. And for all of the server-related things, please feel free to go chase down hp.com/go/Ubuntu. I hope that it won't be as many years again before I manage to get back to a UDS. But as long as I'm here, and given the role that I have in the Debian space, let me extend a personal invitation to all of you who think it would be interesting or relevant to join us this summer in July in Nicaragua for the Debian Developers Conference. I'm confident that if you have an interest in getting more involved in what happens upstream of the packages that you work on and the things that you do in Ubuntu, you would find that community and that event just as encouraging, inviting, and potentially supportive of your interests, needs, and desires to get real work done as you find UDS. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and enjoy the rest of the week. Yes, I understand that contrary to most keynotes, I've actually got a couple minutes left. If anybody has questions they'd like to ask, I'd be happy to take them.
We have time. We have time for 2 questions.
You're all so shy.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the pod, huge trailer thing full of servers?
What would you like to know?
Tell them about it.
It's a big pod. It's a trailer thing. It's huge and it's full of servers. I mean, seriously, that's what they are. They are, racks and racks of servers that are designed to be rapidly deployed in, pre-configured configurations, and it's all pretty cool stuff if you have a need to buy like thousands and thousands of cores at a time. Of course, in the future, you'll be able to get something like 2,880 cores in a single rack once Moonshot hits its stride, but.
On the power management,
Yep.
do you think you can really change the way the energy usage and profile of a CPU, or will you do it by being smarter about working, about executing your workload on optimized servers?
I think the answer is yes. And the reason I say that is that I don't think we can solve the MIPS per watt per, or dollars per watt per MIPS problem in servers by just doing one thing. Clearly, the kinds of server restructuring and radical rethinking of how we aggregate resources to build a data center that's represented by the Moonshot program won't solve every IT problem and be relevant for every possible workload. If it were, we wouldn't need programs like Odyssey at the other end of the scaling continuum. So, in some sense, I realize it's a non-answer answer, but it's because the answer is yes. We have to be able to do both. We have to do a better job of tuning the systems to understand what the needs of the various workloads are. And we also have to be smart about picking the right workloads for the right classes of devices. I think that's the combination that gets us to where we want to go. We certainly can't continue to operate in the way we have been forever, because if we do, we just consume infinite amounts of energy, and in the end, it just doesn't work. So, okay, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Okay, while Marco sets up, I'm really glad he's up here today because he's one of our most prolific community charmers in Juju. And when you spend an entire week staying up till 4 a.m. in the morning with a community member trying to fix something that's really bothering you, it's a great community building experience. So recently I had a blog post that said something along the lines of, Juju is going to change the way people deploy Ubuntu server in the cloud. And I feel that's because of the Juju Charm Store. So Marco's going to take you through a little tour, and without further ado, you ready?
Yes. No. Oh, okay, so the presentation shows up full screen on my laptop. So we'll just scroll through slides, that's fine. So hello, my name is Marco Ceppi. It's F5 on my computer though. So. Anyways, while I'm fixing this real quickly. So my name is Marco Ceppi. I'm a community member and a Juju charmer. And I'm going to be talking about the charm school, but I'm briefly going to explain what Juju is. I know Mark touched on it earlier during his keynote. I cannot multitask very well, so one moment. Oh, there it is. And now I should be mirrored. Oh, great success. Okay. Okay, yes. Working once again. So, Juju Charm Store. I'm going to be discussing what the Juju Charm Store is, but briefly I'm going to discuss exactly what Juju is. So Juju is a tool that Canonical is producing that is in a sentence, a dead easy, super cloudy, DevOps distilled service orchestration tool for the cloud. And essentially what that all means is, and as it's been referred to commonly is, it is apt-get for the cloud. So it's how you deploy services, packages, etc. in a cloud infrastructure and scale them out. So you deploy packages, well, you actually deploy charms, and charms are services that you deploy with Juju. So authors, like myself and others, will write charms that deploy services into the cloud. Services being any number of things, as common examples as Hadoop, which is a big data tool, as well as things like WordPress and silly things like Minecraft and other examples like Varnish and just tools that you'd want to run and use in the cloud. Those are all encapsulated inside of charms. So why use Juju and why use charms? Well, as most people who work in development or DevOps know, if you're going to do something once, you might as well write a script for it because odds are you will do it again over and over again. And that's what a charm is. It is an encapsulated experience of an expert and what they do, whether it's an expert in MySQL or Hadoop or Juju, or Juju, but WordPress. They've taken their experience in building a scalable service and they've put that all in a charm for anyone to easily download and consume. So you don't have to know a thing about coding, but you can go from zero to service in the cloud in a few minutes using Juju and the expertise that was packaged in that person's charm. So I'm going to talk about what the Charm Store is. It is a fantastic service that's being offered as part of this Juju package. So charms are submitted to this Charm Store, and a charmer, like myself and others, review this charm. So someone says, I'm an expert in this service, or I deploy this service, or I wrote this charm because I like this service. Whatever it may be, whether it's something like WordPress or etc. They write a charm, they put all their expertise and everything they need to know to deploy that charm in a cloud infrastructure in a charm. A charmer will come along and reviews it. And what they do is they review it for things like, is this actually security conscious? Will it just download a Trojan, or will it expose services it's not supposed to? Is it actually a best practice and a secure charm, so it's not going to cause any harm to your infrastructure? And they make sure that it's a complete and full service, that it's not half implemented or et cetera. So when you install something from the Juju Charm Store, you're getting a completely full and reviewed, certified, excellent, ready to go, charm deployable service. The Charm Store, unlike the archives and other services, it's never frozen. So if you have an update for Oneric right now and you need to update it, your charm in the Oneric branch, you can do so by submitting a quick patch to it. Someone will review it just like everything else, and it gets implemented into Oneric. And by that, it becomes a living archive. And it is never frozen, it's never still, there's never any old services hanging around inside of the Juju Charm Store. So it being a store, you have to ask yourself, well, how much will this cost me? It's a Charm Store. But actually, it's free. It's a free service that's being provided as part of the Juju Charm collection. Charms are free. They're open. They are provided in an open license, something like GPL, et cetera, that's acceptable from the OSI compliance. So it's free. It's free for you to download, to remix, to fork, to change, to do whatever you want to, because charms are free. Juju in itself and charms are very quick and easy. So you go from a few commands from zero to an infrastructure that's completely deployed and ready to go, that's charm and cloud ready. And what I'm going to do is show you, because I can talk forever about it, But I'm going to show you exactly how you can go from 0 to 100 and what some of the cool things you can do with charms once you've deployed them from the charm store. So this is an example of what I did about 10 minutes ago. I went and ran juju deploy, MySQL, AppFlower, phpMyAdmin, EtherPad-Lite, and then I ran a couple of those extra commands at the bottom, which are just semantics. They're there just because they have to, and it's something from Juju. But essentially, in less than 10 commands, I have these 4 services running inside of, right now, EC2, but any cloud provider that's acceptable from Juju can be run. These running. So I'm going to go ahead and just switch over to my terminal and show a couple of the powerful configuration options and things that you can do with charms that make it really a powerful tool for the cloud. Oh, I'm going to spell correctly first, and then there we go. So I'm just going to run this command, which shows me everything that I have running in my environment. So it's going to connect to EC2. It's going to tell me exactly what I have going on. And we wait for EC2, so we'll give Amazon a second. And it pulls this list of everything that I just deployed. And I deployed a couple other things as well because it's so easy to deploy something. So right now I have a bunch of services sitting out in the cloud. There's AppFlower, which is a really unique tool developed by the upstream to be a rapid development environment in the web. EtherPad-Lite, which we use for things like pad.ubuntu.com. Minecraft, if you're bored and want to play video games. There's Minecraft. There's MySQL, which is used to kind of tie all these together. And then there's phpMyAdmin, which I've been using to administrate the MySQL server. And WordPress, which I've been using to blog about. So anytime now, I can go ahead and just pull up something like my AppFlower instance and access it using the public address here. And now this is what I've just installed a few minutes ago using Juju. It's ready for me to start going and using. And how this author went ahead and encapsulated this, and if you go to jujucharms.com, you can kind of follow all the charms that are in the charm store right now. So I went ahead and pulled up his. And his is just a couple of hooks. Hooks are things that charms implement. But he just wrote a couple of hooks that tied together how to deploy his service. And most importantly, they're written in any language. So in this case, these are written in Bash. And as you can see, relatively speaking, they're just simple lines of Bash code that deploy the service. But what makes it so powerful is that Juju provides a framework for these charms in the charm store and others to scale and connect to other services within the Juju environment. So a couple other things you can do with Juju and the Juju charm store is, for instance, there was a use case where phpMyAdmin had a bug in the archive. Right now, when I deployed phpMyAdmin, it deploys everything from the repository, from the archives. But there was a bug in the archives, and I couldn't wait for it to be fixed, so I went ahead and did something like this. Oh, there we go. There I go, I'm misspelling things again. Okay, they're spelled correctly this time. So I ran this, and what this is going to do right now is it's going to tell my charm that the archives are great, but I wish to use whatever the latest stable release from upstream is. And so now this is connected, it's sent to the server, it's went off, and it's gone off to connect to Juju. It lets Juju know that I want to change this, and my charm recognizes that and says, okay, here's the set of instructions written in Bash in my instance that I need to do in order to make this from the archive version to the upstream version. So if I'm going to go ahead and grab the URL and log into phpMyAdmin, and it should be updated to use, thank you. Okay, it's giving me a second because it's still running the command. So it takes about 5 seconds, plus or minus lag time for EC2. But once this is done running, you give it a second. But there are a plethora of other configuration options. We'll come back to that. I promise this is going to be awesome. There are a plethora of configuration options for all charms, and charms expose different things you can tune. For instance, MySQL charm. The MySQL charm has a set of options that you can use to help tune MySQL to whatever you're using it for, including an option for setting the tuning level. So I'm going to go ahead and just get all the options for MySQL. And this right here, for instance, explains the tuning level. So you can change things from safest, fastest, and unsafe. And that tunes MySQL on the fly to be safest, which is kind of more of a stock MySQL, very low-key. Fast, where it cuts out a lot of the bloat that you normally would use and gives you the minimum that's required to run it in the fastest instance possible. And unsafe, which is more experimental things. So we're going to go back over here now. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And so right now I'm running 3.5.1, And it's the most up-to-date version. And here are all the services that I've been attached to in the MySQL server. So AppFlower, Etherpad, etc. And then 3 weeks later, an update comes along and the package is fixed. So now I can revert back to archive. I don't need to run the latest anymore. I can just switch this back to false and waiting the same typical 5-minute time period between lag time, internet, configuration hooks firing, magic happening in the background. But once that's done working, this version number will switch from 3.5.1 to 3.4.0-deb1, or whichever's the package upstream. And that really provides the power, and that really was what lends so much flexibility and power to the Charm store, is that you're not really tied into too many constraints. It's whatever you need to do to get the service to deploy and be scalable and ready and awesome in the cloud is what you can do. And there's really no limit on things like when you need to get updates in, or how long updates can stand around, and when you are allowed to update them, as well as things that are more tedious to do in other situations in their archives. They really cut down a lot of those barriers to make it simple for people to get the best product they can, charmed, capsulated, and ready to go. I gotta refresh. And so now I'm back to 3.4.10 deb, and all my information's intact. So that's kind of one of the things you can do with config hooks. They can be as simple as changing the site title. In WordPress, you can change your site title. In this case, you can switch between upstream and downstream. It's really up to the Charm authors to implement all these really cool and neat features. And that pretty much sums up the things you can do with the Juju Charm store and how awesome it is in 15 minutes. There's obviously so much more to cover. So let me open this up. Okay. This is where you can go find out more about Juju. That's where you can talk to us on Freenode. And there's a session this afternoon, 4:05 in the Grand Ballroom H, to go over in more detail, in an hour-long detail, answer questions you have about Juju, and give more in-depth instructions about it. I think 5:04. Check the Summit website.
Yeah. We have time for one question, and then we're getting back to work. Anyone have a question? Anybody? Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, do you need separate machines in the cloud for each service you want to deploy? In other words, can you deploy MySQL and WordPress and something else on one instance, or you need separate for each service?
Yes, you can. In this case, they're all deployed on separate machines. But if you needed to, if it was a requirement where you wanted to cut down, if you were running maybe a more lighter environment where you didn't need to necessarily have everything on each service, you can deploy multiple charms onto the same machine. So that's a way you can cut down infrastructure if that was something that was a requirement of yours. So yes, to answer your question.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Sessions, everyone.